There is a building in Zurich with no name on the door, no sign, no intercom visible from the street. The people who meet inside it don't need directions. They already know where it is because someone who mattered told them, quietly, once. What gets decided in rooms like that never makes the news, and that's not an accident. That's the entire point. Please subscribe and activate the button to help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can bring you more relevant content and so YouTube can notify you when we publish new videos. Most people think wealth looks like what they see on Instagram. The yacht, the watch, the penthouse with floor-to-ceiling glass. And yes, those things exist. They're real, but they're the surface, the outermost shell of something far more structured, far more deliberate, and far less visible than any photo would suggest. The actual machinery of serious wealth doesn't want to be seen. It doesn't need to be. When you're operating at the level where a single phone call can redirect $1 billion, you stopped caring about visibility a long time ago. Visibility is for people still building. The ones who've already built. They prefer shadows. This is something that took me a long time to understand. We're conditioned to think power announces itself. Kings wore crowns. Generals wore medals. American billionaires used to put their names on buildings. But the older the money gets, the quieter it becomes. And the quietest money in the world is also, almost without exception, the most powerful. Think about the families that shaped the last 200 years of global finance. The ones whose names occasionally surface in history books but whose actual holdings, structures, and influence have never been cleanly mapped by anyone outside their inner circle. There's a reason for that. Opacity isn't a side effect of their success. It's a feature of it, built in, maintained deliberately across generations. What we call old money isn't just about age. It's about architecture. The way wealth at that level is structured looks nothing like what a successful entrepreneur builds in a single lifetime. A tech founder might accumulate $10 billion and hold it in a relatively transparent way. Publicly traded stock, a foundation with a name on it, maybe a family office that occasionally shows up in filings. That's not how dynastic wealth works. Not even close. Dynastic wealth lives inside layers. Holding companies that own holding companies. Foundations in jurisdictions chosen not for convenience but for legal invisibility. Trusts administered by people whose names you will never read anywhere. The beneficial owner, the actual human being whose life all of this ultimately serves, is sometimes so far removed from the legal surface of the structure that even a sophisticated investigator would struggle to draw a clean line between the person and the asset. That's not tax evasion, necessarily. Some of it is legal in every jurisdiction it touches. The structure itself is the product, and building it correctly so that it functions across borders, across generations, across political climates, that is a skill. A specific, expensive, carefully cultivated skill that a very small group of lawyers, bankers, and advisors have spent their entire careers perfecting. These advisors don't advertise. They don't have websites with client testimonials. They get referred, quietly, once. And here's the part that most analysis of wealth misses entirely. The structure isn't just about protecting money. It's about protecting influence. Because at this level, money and influence are not separate things. They are the same thing expressed in different forms. You convert one into the other constantly, fluidly, depending on what the moment requires. Cash when you need to move fast. Relationships when you need to move quietly. Assets when you need to signal permanence. The ultra-wealthy don't think about net worth the way a financial journalist calculates it. They think about reach. How many industries can I affect? How many governments have people in them who owe me something? How many crises have I been positioned to survive, or better yet, to profit from? Net worth is a number. Reach is a reality. And the families we're talking about have been extending that reach for longer than most nations have existed in their current form. You start to understand, when you look at this honestly, that the system isn't broken. It isn't failing to distribute wealth because of inefficiency. It's concentrating wealth because that's what it was designed to do. Not by conspiracy, by logic, by the compounding advantage of people who understood the rules earlier, wrote some of them, and then built structures that made sure the rules kept working in their favor. The question isn't whether this is fair. The question is, how exactly does it work? Let's start with something most people have never thought about: the ownership of ownership. You've heard of BlackRock. You've probably heard of Vanguard, two of the largest asset management firms on the planet. Between them, they are among the top shareholders in nearly every major publicly traded company in the United States. Energy companies, banks, tech giants, pharmaceutical groups, media conglomerates. You name an industry, and somewhere in the ownership stack, those names appear. Now here's the part that rarely gets discussed in mainstream coverage. Who owns them? Vanguard's structure is unusual. It's technically owned by its own funds, which means it's owned by its investors, which means it has no single external owner in the traditional sense. BlackRock is publicly traded, but the largest single institutional shareholder in BlackRock is, at various points in recent history, Vanguard. So Vanguard, which is partly owned by the funds it manages, is also a major owner of the firm that competes with it and simultaneously owns the same underlying companies. If that makes your head spin slightly, good. That's the correct response, because this isn't an accident of the market. It's what concentrated institutional ownership actually looks like when you trace it honestly. The circularity is real. The implications of that circularity for corporate governance, for competitive markets, for who actually controls the strategic direction of entire industries are something academics have been debating for years without resolution. But that's the public layer. The regulated, disclosed, documented layer. Go one level deeper, and you enter family office territory. Family offices are the private wealth management structures of the ultra-rich households with assets typically starting at $100 million and scaling up into the tens of billions. There are estimated to be somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 single-family offices globally. Most of them are invisible. They don't appear in any public registry. They don't file disclosures that are easily searchable. They hold assets, make investments, manage cash, coordinate philanthropy, and maintain the operational infrastructure of dynastic wealth entirely out of public view. Some of these family offices have more assets under management than mid-sized sovereign wealth funds. They move in and out of positions without triggering the reporting thresholds that apply to registered investment advisors. They can hold stakes in private companies operating businesses, real estate portfolios, agricultural land, infrastructure assets in ways that create no public record whatsoever. One family, one office, no press releases. And they are networked with each other in ways that are deliberately informal, not a cartel. Nothing as crude or legally exposed as that. Something more like a shared cultural understanding of how the game is played, who the reliable counterparts are, and where the real opportunities exist before they become visible to everyone else. Information is the actual currency at this level, not dollars, not euros, not euros. The early knowledge of what's about to happen, a regulatory change, a technology shift, a political realignment is worth more than almost any asset you can name. Which is why the social architecture of elite wealth is not decorative. It's functional. The dinners, the clubs, the ski chalets, the invitation-only conferences in places like Davos or the Allen & Company gathering in Sun Valley, these aren't networking events in the way a startup founder would recognize. They're not about exchanging business cards. They're about maintaining the relational fabric through which information flows. You're not there to close a deal. You're there to remind someone that you're still in the room, that you're still relevant, that when something moves, they should think of you. Access is everything, and access is never bought directly. Not at this level. It's earned through a series of smaller signals. The right introduction, the right discretion shown at the right moment, the right response to a test you didn't know you were taking. There are people in that world who have been quietly assessed for years before being invited into a specific conversation. And there are people with hundreds of millions of dollars who will never be invited, because somewhere along the way they said the wrong thing in front of the wrong person. Or worse, they talked too much, loudly, in a way that signaled they didn't understand the most fundamental rule of this world. The most powerful people in it never tell you how powerful they are. And if you ever find yourself in a room where someone is working hard to impress you with their access and their connections and their proximity to serious money, take note of one thing. The people they're name-dropping, those people are not in this room. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. We tend to talk about wealth concentration as an economic phenomenon, a matter of statistics. The top 1% holds this percentage of assets. The Gini coefficient measures that. The data is presented in reports, debated in policy circles, occasionally turned into graphics that go mildly viral on social media. And then nothing changes. Not because the problem isn't real, but because the conversation is always about the outcome, never about the mechanism. The mechanism is what we need to talk about. Strategic acquisitions are the cleanest example. When a large conglomerate buys a smaller competitor not because it's undervalued, not because it has a technology the acquirer needs, but because it represents a potential threat that's cheaper to absorb than to compete against. That's not a market functioning efficiently. That's a market being managed. And it's entirely legal, done every day, at every scale. The pattern, once you see it, is everywhere. A family-owned holding company quietly accumulates minority stakes in 6 different companies operating in the same sector. Not enough in any single one to trigger regulatory scrutiny. Not enough to require disclosure in most jurisdictions. But together, across all 6, they have enough combined influence over the sector's key suppliers, distributors, and talent pipelines that any new entrant trying to compete faces structural friction at every turn. Not blocked, not explicitly, just made it more difficult, slower, more expensive, in ways that are hard to point to and even harder to litigate. This is not a conspiracy. There's no room where executives gather to coordinate against outsiders. It doesn't need to be that explicit. When you've been operating in a sector for 3 generations, you simply know which relationships matter, which pressure points exist, and how to use proximity to resource flows as leverage. It's institutional knowledge, accumulated over decades, encoded into the culture of the family and the firm. The luxury sector is possibly the most refined expression of this. And when I say refined, I mean it technically. They have refined the mechanics of market control into something that looks, from the outside, like pure aesthetics. Think about how a house like Hermès operates. Deliberately constrained supply, a waiting list that isn't really a waiting list, it's a sorting mechanism. The Birkin bag is not hard to make. Hermès is not incapable of producing more of them. The scarcity is manufactured, maintained with absolute discipline, because scarcity isn't just a pricing strategy, it's a social technology. It creates hierarchy among customers. It forces the most status-conscious consumers to compete with each other for access, which drives up the perceived value of the product without any change to the product itself. The people who get the bag without waiting are signaling something to everyone who knows. And everyone who knows, knows. That's the entire architecture. An object that functions as a membership card. A piece of leather that tells other people exactly how close you are to the center of something. LVMH, the conglomerate that controls Dior, Louis Vuitton, Bulgari, Tiffany, Moet and Chandon and dozens of other names, understood this better than almost anyone. Bernard Arnault built one of the largest luxury empires in history, not by making beautiful things, though the things are often beautiful, but by understanding that what he was really selling was hierarchy, belonging to the right group, distance from the wrong one. The psychological need to have something that announces your position without you having to say a word. It's a perfect business. The product is desirable precisely because it's restricted. The restriction is maintained through price, through distribution control, through the cultivation of an aesthetic mythology that makes consumers feel that owning the object connects them to something ancient and rare and earned. The mythology is as manufactured as the scarcity, but it works, reliably, globally, across cultures that have almost nothing else in common. What Arnault, and the families and structures behind him, understood is that the real product was never the bag. The real product was the feeling of being above someone else. And once you're selling that feeling, once you've engineered the social conditions under which people will pay almost any price for it, you are no longer in the fashion business. You're in the power business. The question I kept coming back to, the longer I looked at all of this, was the one nobody seems to ask directly. Not how they build it, not whether it's fair, something more specific, something that changes the way you see everything that comes next. What do you have to give up to stay inside it? Because here's what the outside view always misses. The structure we've been describing, the opacity, the networks, the manufactured hierarchies, it doesn't just protect wealth, it extracts something from the people inside it too. And what comes next in this story is the part that none of the financial analysis ever covers. It's also the part that explains everything. There's a word that surfaces constantly in conversations about dynastic wealth, spoken with reverence in certain circles, and with complete ignorance of its real meaning almost everywhere else. The word is stewardship. In the language of old money families, stewardship doesn't mean charity. It doesn't mean responsibility in any civic sense. It means something far more specific and far more cold, the obligation to receive something intact and pass it on intact or larger. The individual is not the point. The individual is a temporary custodian of something that existed before they were born and is expected to continue after they die. Their job, from the moment they're old enough to understand what they've inherited, is to not be the one who breaks it. That pressure is real. It shapes behavior in ways that outsiders rarely account for. The children of seriously wealthy families, not the performatively rich, not the first-generation tech billionaires with Instagram accounts and identity politics, but the genuinely old money dynasties are not raised with freedom, they're raised with obligation. There's a difference. Freedom is the absence of constraint. Obligation is the presence of a role you didn't choose and can't easily leave. The money is the inheritance. The role is the condition of the inheritance. You will marry in ways that serve the family. Not necessarily an arranged marriage in any formal sense, but the social architecture of your upbringing ensures you never seriously encounter people who aren't appropriate. You go to the right schools, the right summer programs, the right places in the right seasons, and the right people are already there. The selection happens before you're old enough to question it. You will not take public positions on anything that creates unnecessary enemies. The family has maintained relationships across the political spectrum for generations, not out of ideological flexibility, but out of strategic indifference to ideology. Power doesn't care which party is in office. It has learned to work with all of them. A family member who becomes loudly partisan is a liability. Not because the views are wrong, because loud views close doors. You will not fail publicly. Private failure, a bad investment, a difficult marriage, a period of personal struggle, these can be managed within the structure, quietly, with resources that make most problems solvable. But public failure, the kind that makes news, that exposes the family name to scrutiny or ridicule, that is treated with something close to existential alarm. The reputation of the whole is more important than the dignity of the individual. And here is the reversal that most analysis of wealth completely ignores. This is not a comfortable life. It is a powerful one. Those are not the same thing. The ultra-wealthy live in a condition of permanent, managed exposure. Every relationship is assessed for its utility or its risk. Every social interaction carries the undercurrent of that assessment, even when the conversation is light, even when it looks, from the outside, like a beautiful dinner in a beautiful place with beautiful people talking about nothing important. Underneath it, always, is the calculation. Who is this person to us? What are they worth to us? Can they be trusted with what we know? Are they trying to get something? That hypervigilance doesn't turn off. It can't. Because the cost of misjudging, of trusting the wrong person, of letting the wrong details slip to someone with the wrong incentives has historically been real. Fortunes have been lost to bad confidants. Family structures have unraveled because of one indiscretion at the wrong moment. So they learn to live inside a kind of permanent performance, warm enough to maintain the relationship, guarded enough to never actually expose themselves. It's a form of intimacy that looks like connection but operates more like a long, sophisticated negotiation. And what's genuinely striking is how often, when people who've been inside that world eventually leave it, or lose the protection of it, what they describe as missing isn't the money. It's not the houses or the travel or the access. What they miss is simpler and stranger than that. They miss knowing who they were, because when your identity is built entirely around a role within a structure, and that structure is removed by death, by estrangement, by a catastrophic event that breaks the continuity, what's left is a person who was never really given the chance to find out what they actually wanted, what they actually believed, what they would have become if the architecture hadn't been laid down around them before they were old enough to see it. The empire protects everything, including yourself. None of this is going away. That's not cynicism. It's just the logic of compounding. Wealth at scale compounds faster than any external force, in almost any circumstance, can erode it. A financial crisis that devastates the middle class restructures an asset base at the top. A political shift that threatens one industry creates opportunity in another. A pandemic, a war, a technological disruption. Each of these events is, for most people, something that happens to them. For the structures we've been describing, they are events to be navigated, sometimes exploited, always survived. The tools available to serious wealth in a crisis are not the tools available to anyone else. You can move capital across borders overnight. You can shift assets into classes that are uncorrelated to whatever is collapsing. You can call someone who owes you access to information that isn't public yet and make a decision 12 hours before everyone else makes the same decision at a much higher cost. And the legal infrastructure of the modern world, the network of international financial law, treaty arrangements, regulatory carve-outs, and jurisdictional complexity was not built to contain this. It was built alongside it, often by people whose careers moved fluidly between the private sector and the regulatory bodies meant to oversee it. That revolving door isn't a scandal, it's a design. Which brings us to the part of this that most people find hardest to sit with. You can understand the system completely, every mechanism, every structural advantage, every layer of the architecture, and still find yourself unable to do very much about it, not because you're powerless in every sense, but because the entry points are so few, the requirements so specific, and the timeline so long that most people reasonably conclude it's not worth attempting. That's not an accident either. The most sophisticated control mechanism ever developed isn't force. It isn't even law. It's the internalized belief, held by the people outside the structure, that the structure is simply how things are, natural, inevitable, the result of merit or history, or some combination of both that would be too disruptive to challenge seriously. The people inside the empire don't need to convince you of this explicitly. The culture does it for them. The education system, the media, the aspirational messaging of luxury brands that tells you the goal is to get inside, not to question whether the inside is what it appears to be. Consume the product. Buy the signal. Perform the aspiration. Keep moving toward the gate. And the gate, of course, is always just a little further ahead. But here's the thing about understanding a system clearly. It doesn't automatically free you from it. Understanding is not the same as exit. What it actually does, practically, in real terms, is change where you put your attention and your resources. You stop competing inside a game whose rules were written to produce a specific outcome that doesn't include you. You start looking at where the gaps are, where the structures are thinner, where a specific kind of knowledge, applied at the right moment in the right place, creates a leverage point that the architecture didn't account for. Because for all its sophistication, the empire has a structural vulnerability that it has never fully solved. It needs people it can trust, continuously, at every level. And trust, at the scale and longevity required to maintain what we've been describing, is genuinely rare. The number of people who are both capable and reliably discreet, and aligned with the interests of a dynastic structure over decades, that pool is smaller than it looks from the outside. Families have lost control of assets not because a competitor outsmarted them, but because a trusted advisor made a different choice, because a key relationship broke down, because someone inside the structure decided the terms were no longer acceptable. The people who understand how these empires actually function are not the mythology, not the surface aesthetics, but the real operational logic. Those people are more valuable to the structure than almost any asset, because assets can be replaced. Understanding can't. Which means the most contrarian move in a world built to keep you outside isn't to try to break the gate down. It's to become so precisely useful, so specifically knowledgeable about something the structure needs and cannot easily replicate that the gate opens from the inside. Not because they like you, because they need what you know. The empire doesn't die. It recruits. Luxury power exists for one reason only: to reveal what the elite pay to hide. Subscribe to Luxury Power and hit the bell now. Every week a new secret is uncovered. Drop in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing our global audience. Everything you saw here is based on real cases, verified contracts, and documented facts. We don't glorify wealth, we dissect it. Do you still think money buys freedom? Tell us in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to see the truth. And remember, even the most expensive life can be a gilded cage. See you in the next video.